Good morning. I think I'm switched on. It's anything you may want to leave now, because part of the message will be about unicorns, but hopefully not too much. But I wanted to sort of start by asking a question. Have you ever made a bad decision or entered into a moment where you thought I thought people might say yes to that. Or you may have entered into a moment where you think this could be a defining moment as to what I do, whether I go this way or that way, or whether I do this thing or that could change the outcome of stuff. And I found that when I read through the Bible, that the entire Bible is filled with these moments where people have a choice, that something comes along, an opportunity or an idea comes along, and they have a choice about which way they go, whether they go left or right, or forwards or backwards, whether they pick how they're going to move forwards. And I kind of wanted to start by telling you a little bit of a story about an idea that I made that might not be considered the greatest idea ever. I think it was still a good idea, but you guys might disagree. This happened a couple of years ago, and there was a few of us went on a canal barge, and I've got some people have heard this story before and know what's coming. So there is, are we working? I'm not working, Alex. I can just stand here and click, or you could click the arrow for me. There we go. So some of us were along for the ride. Stuart was there, obviously. And we decided that we would go along on a canal barge for the day. We'd hide it out for somebody's birthday. And we were going to take it out and just have fun. And on the top of the canal barge, there was a rope tied to an anchoring point in the top. And Alex, if you can click to the next slide. I decided that it would be really good fun, or Joss, thank you, are we going? Presentations are wonderful when they don't work, aren't they? I should have remembered this from the last time. Anytime I have a presentation, it doesn't work. Can we get it to the next slide at all? Alex? Anybody? So I will tell you a little bit of the story until we get to the next slide. What happened is there was this rope tied to the top of the... There we go. I decided it would be a good idea to lean off the side of the boat, sort of over the canal, and hang on to this rope. And it seemed like a great idea. It was all going really well. In fact, I wasn't the only one who tried it. If we go to the next slide... We found Matt was trying it as well, and that wasn't the best picture. He did do better than that, but it was the only picture we got of it. But we decided this was going to be great fun. We can lean off the side of the boat and we feel like we're at sea and we're having great fun. And then we decided it would be even more fun if we both did it at exactly the same time on opposite sides of the boat. But we only had one rope, so we decided what we would do is we'd throw it over one side. Matt would hold the one end, then we'd throw it back, I would hold the other, and we'd lower ourselves down one at a time, and then we'd both be hanging perfectly over the side. We're about the same weight, should work fine. Couldn't see an issue with that. Some of you might see where this is going. This next photo, if we can, that was about 30 seconds after I came out of the water, dripping head to foot. What happened was Matt went down perfectly, he held himself, and then as I lowered myself down, we didn't quite have our physics right, and I counterbalanced Matt a little bit too much. I went in, he tried to pull himself up, and I spent the rest of the day, because we'd hired the boat for the entire day, and this was about 15 minutes into the journey, so I spent the rest of the day with one very wet leg, an entirely wet coat, a jumper, and sort of sat there on a boat feeling very sorry for myself. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of my bad decisions on this journey. Because what then happened was I decided that, well, my shoes are quite wet, or one of my shoes got very wet. I managed to save one shoe, but my other shoe got very wet. And I was sat there with no socks on, one barefoot. I thought, you know what, I can dry my shoe out. And you might notice that chimney pot there, they had a wood-burning stove in the barge. I thought, I'll just stick my shoe on top of the chimney, the heat will dry it out perfectly. Half an hour, I'll have a lovely dry shoe. In half an hour, I didn't have a lovely dry shoe. What I had was a very melted shoe, which the laces kind of melted together and the shoe was shrunk down to about 2 sizes smaller, so I could just about squeeze my foot in it if I tried. It wasn't the best decision I'd ever made, and to be honest, that day wasn't full of great decisions on my part. But it was one of these moments where I had a choice where, to be honest, I think it was Matt's idea that we both leant over the side. I'm going to blame him. But I was stupid enough to say, yes, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go for it. And I think all of us have had a moment in life where we hit these ideas of like, that sounds like a good idea. What could possibly go wrong? Or somebody comes up to us and gives us an idea and says, let's try this. and we say, yeah, that sounds great, let's give it a go. And what I decided was that I think there's 3 different types of ideas that come along when people talk to us. There's 3 different types. There's the paper bag idea, the wooden horse idea, and the unicorn idea, and hopefully those will make sense as we go. So if we can click onto the next slide for me. I'm going to break down these ideas a little bit for you, and maybe you can sort of relate to some of these ideas, and we're going to look at some examples from the Bible as well. So this first idea is the paper bag idea. Now, all of you have seen a paper bag. It doesn't weigh much, it's pretty flimsy. It's normally designed for things like food, fast food, all that kind of stuff. There's a wonderful example of a McDonald's fast food bag there. The problem with paper bags is that they're not exactly constructed well. And paper bag ideas are exactly the same. They're not well thought out. They're an idea that pops into someone's head and says, you know what, that'd be great. Let's just try that. That was kind of like the idea we had. But they don't tend to carry any substance. They're very light, flimsy, and don't have much weight behind them. There's very little thinking put into it. And if you've got your Bibles with me, we're going to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 11. And I'm going to read from verse 1 to 5. And this is a story that some of you, probably most of you, will be familiar with. It's the story of David and Bathsheba. And I'd like to give you an example of when David made a bit of a paper bag idea. So in verse 1 it says this, of chapter 11, it says, it happened in the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked off on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. So David sent and inquired about this woman. And someone said, is that not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Then David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity, and she returned to her house. And the woman conceived, so she sent and told David, and said, I am with child. Now this is, to me, an idea that David had. He was stood on the roof one night, saw something he desired, thought that would be a good idea, and kind of decided that he would just go through with it. Didn't really put much thought into what might happen, and just thought, yeah, this seems like a good idea, let's go for it. And the problem was, it was very poorly thought out because it was somebody else's wife, and as the consequences were, he ended up getting this woman pregnant. She was with child. And the problem is, when we have a paper bag idea, when we think of these ideas that just sort of pop into our head and we think that might be great, like I said, they're poorly thought out, they don't carry much substance, they tend not to stand the test of time. When actually we put it to practice, it doesn't tend to hold up. Also, the weight inside of them tends to come from the name on the bag. If you have a paper bag, it doesn't really mean much unless it's got something printed on the side of it. If you print McDonald's on it, you kind of get an idea of what's going to be inside it. If you print Burger King on the side of it, you get the idea of what's going to be inside of it. The name on the outside is pretty much the only weight that's carried with that bag. And that was kind of what David did, was he decided, I am the king, I can do whatever I like, I will summon this person. He put the weight of his name and his position behind his idea and said, this idea will be fine because of who I am and the position that I've got. And sometimes we can do that we come up with an idea that seems poorly thought out, but we think, well, because of the person I am or because of the position I'm in, it should be fine. There shouldn't be any issues. That was kind of what we had with me and Matt, was that we thought, well, we're both strong lads, we should be able to hold each other up. We're sort of the same weight, it should be no issue at all. And then what happened was that it was really poorly thought out. The only sort of good part about it was that it looked good, and then we got a good photo with me wet for the rest of the day. That was the only good part about this idea. But the other thing about paper bag ideas is that when a storm comes along, when a problem comes along, have you ever seen a wet paper bag? It doesn't hold itself very well, does it? It starts to fall to pieces, to disintegrate. It reminds me very much of when you put a tissue through the washing machine. I'm sure all of us have accidentally done that at some point, that we leave a snotty tissue in someone's jeans pocket, throw it in the wash, pull it out, and it sticks to everything, doesn't it? It just disintegrates into nothing, sticks to absolutely everything, and all that you're left with is just white bits of fluff that you've then got to try and pick off. The thing with a paper bag idea is if you have enough of them, they tend to stick to you. If you have enough stupid ideas, people will go, we're not going to listen to him, he's the person who has all those stupid ideas. It sticks with you a bit like that tissue. in the washing machine. And the problem is, as soon as a storm comes, it pretty much destroys that idea completely, because once that tissue has been through the washing machine, there's very little chance that it's going to be able to be used as a tissue again, because it's disintegrated into nothing. That's what happens with these paper bag ideas, is that they just disintegrate into nothing at the first sign of pressure that's put on them. If we can go to the next slide for me. This is a Trojan horse. Some of you might know the story behind it, but this is my wooden horse idea. So if anyone doesn't know the idea behind the Trojan horse, what happened was the Greeks were trying to take Troy, and they couldn't sort of besiege the city. So what they did was they pretended that they were leaving, hid some soldiers inside a wooden horse, and then sailed away. The guys from Troy came out and thought, they've left, and they've left us this wonderful statue that we can take. And it so happened that the horse was sort of the symbol of Troy, so they thought that'll be a wonderful victory trophy for us to bring in. So they wheeled it into the city, closed the gates, and sort of went to bed. And then in the middle of the night, soldiers jumped out from the horse, opened the gates, which allowed the Greeks to come back round. They'd sailed around the island and came back in, came into Troy and destroyed everyone and overpowered Troy. And this is sort of similar to some ideas that people have. And normally it's not us that has a Trojan horse idea. Normally it's somebody else that comes up with an idea and says, this would be a good idea. Have you tried this? And it looks really impressive when we have this idea. It's a massive structure. The Greeks weren't stupid in the way that they sort of built this horse. They knew what the people from Troy liked. They knew that that was their symbol for their city. And they knew that it would play to their egos. Quite often, a Trojan horse idea will play to somebody's ego. They'll look at you and say, you know what, if you did this, you'd be quite capable of that. You'd be able to do this. It would make you look fantastic. And that's exactly what the people of Troy thought. They thought this would make us look fantastic. If we wheel this horse into our city, not only have we defeated the Greeks, but we've got something to show for it as well. The problem with the Trojan horse idea is it doesn't tend to have any natural momentum of its own. The Greeks, the people from Troy had to wheel this horse in by themselves. As soon as it stopped, it was stationary. That's kind of the same with these ideas that we get sometimes, that it takes a lot of effort to get them moving. And then as soon as we stop pulling or trying, the ideas seem to stand still. They develop no natural momentum of their own. So they drain absolutely everything out of us because we're pulling, dragging them in, trying to get these ideas off the ground and moving. And they look fantastic, but actually, they're, again, not well thought out, not checked out. And we don't see all the consequences of it. And the thing with the Trojan horse idea is it tends to have this hidden agenda, something hidden on the inside of it that then jumps out at the last minute and sort of completely destroys you. And that's what happened with the people of Troy, was that they saw the wonderful idea, the image that it would be, but they didn't see the hidden agenda. And that's why I say these are normally ideas that somebody else will bring to you and say this would be really good, but actually it has a bit of a hidden agenda behind it. And if we go back to 2 Samuel in chapter 11 and back down to verse 14, we see that David has a bit of a Trojan horse idea for himself, and he decides to give Uriah this Trojan horse idea. And he turns around to him at verse 14. He says, in the morning it happened that David wrote a letter to Joab, who was the head of the army, and sent it by the hand of Uriah. So he gave Uriah a letter and said, here's a message, go and take this. O favoured one, the person that I've called specially, go and take this letter to the general of the army. And verse 15 it says this, and he wrote in the letter saying, set Uriah at the forefront of the hottest battle and retreat from him, that he may be struck down and die. So it was when Joab besieged the city that he assigned Uriah to a place where he knew there was valiant men. Then the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the people of the servants of David fell, and Uriah the Hittite died also. So David has this idea that he gives to Uriah and says, this is the idea I've got. Take this letter for me, travel back to the army, and give it to Joab. What he doesn't realise is that inside this letter he's carrying his own death warrant. He's basically signed his own death over to Joab, hands him the letter, and Joab reads it and says, okay, David the king has commanded us to kill Uriah by sending him onto the front of the battle, to the heaviest part of the battle, and kill him. And Uriah is none the wiser. He just thinks he's doing what the king's ordered him to, follows through the orders, and in the end we find out that he dies because of it. These ideas that we get sometimes that come from other people that suggest, you should try this, you'd be able to do it. Actually, ultimately, it can end up destroying us. A Trojan horse idea will either subdue you or completely wipe you out. It takes all of your effort, all of your time, and then as soon as you get to the end of it, you're left with absolutely nothing. It either lifts the other person up and doesn't do anything for yourself, it doesn't further you in what God's called you to do, or it completely destroys you and you can't come back from it. So many people have ideas, especially in church, where they think, this would be great if we could do this. And then they hand it over to somebody else to do. It completely destroys them. And they get so demoralised and hurt in church that they never want to come back, because these ideas seem like a great idea, but it's never been thought out, or it has a hidden agenda that somebody else will benefit from this idea that's played out. And then they end up being hurt for it. And then the third idea, if we can go to the next slide. The third idea is the unicorn idea. I found it very difficult to find a real picture of a unicorn, I must confess. If anyone has one, please feel free to sort of send it to me. But in this unicorn idea, I wanted to take the story in 1 Samuel 17 of David and Goliath. It's a story that many of us know, many of us have heard of. And if I were to say David and, pretty much everybody would say Goliath. It's probably David's most defining moment in the Bible. And it comes very early in his story. We've only sort of read about him for a few verses before that in the previous chapter. And this idea that David had a choice about what he could do. And he goes to the king and says, Goliath's terrorising your people, what are you going to do about it? And the king says, well, no one's brave enough to go out and face him. David says, well, you know what? I could do that. There must have been a moment in his head where he felt like God was saying, you could do that. And David thinks, are you sure, God? There must have been that moment where he just thought, hang on a second, am I really volunteering to go out and kill a giant with just a sling and a stone? Is that really the best way to do it? David has this thought, and then he doesn't sort of question it in himself. We don't read that he's sort of questioned it, but he has the idea, says, okay, God, if that's what you're telling me to do, I'm going to go and do it. And these unicorn ideas can sometimes come across a bit crazy. They seem completely bizarre to people around us. They seem like, why on earth would they suggest that we do that? Why on earth would that be the best way to do it? They're a little bit fantastical. I don't know if that's a word or not, but we'll make it a word. So they're a little bit fantastical. They seem crazy, like it could never really happen. A bit like a unicorn. Now, I'm not suggesting that there are really unicorns out there, but there has been debate that unicorns might exist. I am not here to say they do or don't. I'm just saying that they're a fantastical sort of being that we don't actually see. But this idea comes, and it seems too good to believe. It seems like a white horse seems amazing anyway, but then it has a horn that's worth 10 times its weight in gold and all this kind of stuff. It just seems too fantastical to be real. I'm using that word fantastical far too much. But I figure if you use it enough, it will become part of the English dictionary. So if anybody works for Oxford Dictionary or anything like that, just slip them a note saying Michael says fantastical is a word. But I believe that these good ideas that we get come in 3 different levels. I remember somebody telling me this, and I cannot remember for the life of me who it was. But someone said when we have a good idea, there's 3 different levels of ideas that we get. We get the thoroughbred, the Mustang, and the unicorn. The thoroughbred is the safe bet, the thing that we can bet on, that we know is just going to do well. It's going to be solid. If we put our sort of resources behind it, we know we're going to get a return from it. The Mustang is a little bit wilder. It's a good idea, but it seems a little bit crazy. It's a little bit harder to keep a hold of. And as you're sort of working through this idea, it's a little bit wild and crazy, but in the end, it's something quite good. And then the third idea is this unicorn idea, where it's so fantastical that you couldn't believe it really exists. But actually, when we find it, that, like I say, they believed that at one point the horn on a unicorn was worth 10 times its weight in gold, that they were selling it in pharmacies and all that kind of stuff back in the Middle Ages. Now, whether it was real unicorn horn or fake, I will leave you guys to decide. You can research that for yourselves. But there's this sort of idea of 3 different levels of good ideas. And I believe that throughout the Bible, there's a whole load of unicorn ideas that seem like great ideas, but just a little bit too crazy to believe they could actually be true. That like David and Goliath, that he could actually defeat a giant with just a sling and a stone, or like when the walls of Jericho came down, that just marching around them and then giving a bit of a shout would cause the walls to fall down. That seems too great for belief. You look at people like Gideon, who said, you know what, I don't want thousands and thousands of people, I just want 300 men and we can defeat an entire army, but we're not even going to lift a sword to do it. It seems too great to actually be a feasible idea, that the idea of just going into battle and not even having to fight anybody, it shouldn't work. But because it has God behind it, it becomes this great idea that actually works out in the end. And so often I think we limit our good ideas by remaining as either a thoroughbred idea or a Mustang idea, but we don't allow it to fully develop into what God's called us to do, that we hear from God saying, I want you to do this. And we turn around and we have this sort of, are you sure that's what you meant, God? Are you not sure that really you meant this? We kind of give God a revised idea of his idea. He says, do this. We say, but if you think about it, that's a little bit crazy. I don't want to do that. How about I do this instead? We kind of narrow it down into something manageable and feasible that seems reasonable to us. And I think David might have had that same opportunity, that Paul presented to him his armour and said, you know what, if you're going to be brave enough to go out and face him, you need all the backing you can get. You need all the armour and my sword and everything like that. But it wasn't what God had called him to. It wasn't the right fit for him. It didn't fit him. It was too big. It wasn't his calling. We talked a few weeks ago about how we all have our own calling that we're called to, and only we can be effective in that calling, because it's an idea that God's placed on the inside of us, specifically for us. And this idea of a unicorn idea is a bit like that when we have these thoughts from God that we think, hang on a minute, this idea just seems a little bit too crazy to believe. We try and narrow it down and whittle it down to an idea that seems reasonable, rather than saying, okay, God, if you've called me to it, I'll step out in faith, move into the thing that you've called me to, and trust that you'll see me through to the end of that you'll see us through the thing that you've called us to. If we go on to the next slide for me, just to sort of recap those three different ideas, you can get the paper bag idea, which will stick to you. If you have enough paper bag ideas, people will just see you as a little bit crazy and that you always have stupid ideas. You get the Trojan horse idea or the wooden horse idea that will ultimately subdue you because it lifts somebody else up and glorifies somebody else. Or you get the unicorn idea, which can define you. I said that David, when he had that idea to face Goliath, that was probably his defining moment in the Bible, and it came really early on in his life in the Bible. But we hear about it and think, this is David's defining moment, that if he'd have made a choice when he stood there and thought, you know what, actually I can't do that, and turned the other way, then maybe the rest of the Bible would have had a massive chunk out of sort of 1 and 2 Samuel, that David just wouldn't have been in it because he didn't follow through in the plan that God had got called for him. So often we get these callings on our lives, these things that God brings into our heart that we think, that's something I would love to be able to do, but I just don't see how I could do it. And we sort of narrow ourselves back down and say, there's no way I could have that idea and see it through. And God says, no, it's the idea I've called you to. It's the very thing that you were created to be, that you were created to live for, that God made you in a specific and unique way, designed so that this calling would fit perfectly with the character that he's given you and the person that he's made you to be. And yet so many of us sit there and think, you know what, I can't do it, it's not possible. We sort of narrow ourselves back down. But beyond having these ideas, I think there's something greater than just being someone who has unicorn ideas and sees them through. We were in the hub on Tuesday night, as Jane said, and they were talking to people who'd come along to see how we'd sort of put it all together. And one person said to Jane, well, how do you get the ideas for it? How did it all come about? How did it end up like this? And Jane said, well, I kind of have the ideas and it's all sort of shooting stars and unicorns, and then Michael comes along and he builds them. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful idea. I decided I was going to nickname myself the Unicorn Builder. I decided I will from now on be called the Unicorn Builder, because we take these ideas that seem so fantastical and so crazy beyond wildest dreams that they just seem so up in the air. But then actually we look at it and go, you know what, if we do this, it might take time, it might take effort, it might take money, it might take all these things. But if we see it through because we believe it's what God's called us to do, that actually we can help somebody else build their unicorn idea. That when people come along with the craziest idea in the world, so often we quickly just say, you know what, that's stupid, you're never going to be able to do that. I'm sure all of us have had that, where we've had an idea that we've gone to someone and said, this is the idea I've got, I'm so excited about seeing it happen. And they've turned around and said, no, you can't do that. That's never going to happen. There's no way you would be able to make that happen. But actually, if we can get this mentality, if you go to the last slide for me, to be a unicorn builder, that we should live our lifestyles as the unicorn builder, as it were, that we go out looking for other people who have these ideas, and rather than pushing them down and saying, no, you can't do that, you say, you know what, I have a tool that will help you to develop that. People need other people's tools around them. We're designed in such a way that we help one another develop the calling in our own lives, or in the calling of people's lives around us. That when we live our life to the fullest that we're capable of, using all the things that God has equipped us with, that actually it's not just for the benefit of us, but it's for the benefit of the people around us. That our calling is designed to directly correlate with the people around us to help build them up and encourage one another. So I've got quite a short message this morning. I don't want to drag it out. I just want to leave you with those 3 ideas. That do you have paper bag ideas all the time where they just disintegrate into nothing the first time you sort of give it so anything comes against it, it just falls to pieces? Do you always find yourself stuck in sort of somebody else's wooden horse ideas, the Trojan horse that just then ultimately destroys you, drains you of everything and leaves you with nothing? Or are you the kind of person who has unicorn ideas, that thinks of the greatest thing possible, says, you know what, I can do it, and then goes out and finds people who have the tools to do that? One of the things I've found, just as sort of finishing thought, when we started the hub, the idea was nowhere near the size that it was when we started it. When we started it, we were basically just going to paint a wall. That was what we decided, was we were just going to, it looked ugly, so we were going to paint this brick wall. And that was it. That was all we'd planned to do. But what happened, as we sort of got into it, those unicorn ideas started to become more like reality, that as God developed it, and sort of showed us more of the plan that he had, that he started with a little bit of an idea, just planted a seed and then developed that and enabled it to grow. At any point in there, we could have said, you know what, that's too far. We're not going to do that. We're going to stop here. We moved a wall twice. We said, you know what, the first time wasn't enough. We're going to move it again and make it even bigger. We're going to do more than what we thought possible. Every time we felt like this was what God was calling us to do, we would stretch it a little bit further and say, you know what, actually, God's revealed a little bit more of it. It's a little bit bigger than what we thought, and then it's a little bit bigger. And we had a choice that we could have either just sort of settled for the thoroughbred. Painting the wall, making the room look nice would have been a thoroughbred idea. It needed doing. It was a good idea. It was a safe idea. And at the end of it, we would have had a nice-ish looking room. We could have gone a little bit wild like we did the first time and moved the wall and think, you know what, this looks great. I remember the first time we walked in there after we moved the wall back one section, and we walked in and thought, this room is huge. We looked there and thought, we didn't realise how much space we got, that all of a sudden it was massive. But it wasn't the end of the idea that God had got. It was a wild idea when we first thought of it, that, we should take it to the trustees and ask if we can move a wall back. It was a bit crazy, and we thought, no, we're never going to be able to do that. But God had it in his plan for how it was going to develop. But that wasn't the end of the plan. And so often in our lives, we get to that point where we either get to the thoroughbred or the Mustang, but we never push through into the fullness that God's called us to do. And so I'd like to finish by closing in prayer, and then I'll hand back over to Jay. God, I thank you that you've called each and every one of us to do a purpose, that you've called each and every one of us to do something so great that we couldn't even begin to imagine it, but you reveal that to us a little bit at a time, that you just take us one day at a time and help us to develop those visions, help us to develop that calling that's on us. So Father God, I pray for anyone who's in this room that feels like they've got no calling, that feels like they have no idea of what they're called to do, that you would just begin to reveal to them through the people around them the things that you've called them to. Father God, I pray for those people who feel like their calling is too big, that you would just bring people around them that would equip them, that would have the right tools to equip them in their calling that you've called them to. And Father, I pray that as people begin to develop those amazing unicorn ideas, those amazing callings that you've placed on each of their lives, that we as the church would be there to encourage one another, that we would be there to lift each other up, that we wouldn't knock people down, that we wouldn't tell them that their ideas are too great, but we would help them with the correct tools to build those ideas, Father, that we would always be looking to what you've called people to do and not what we think people are best suited for, Father God. I thank you that you're there with us every day, that you guide us through that calling. And so in your name I pray that you would just begin to reveal that to each person in this room. Amen. Thank you.